CEO kept ignoring the black man's outstretched hand at Gala, until he was introduced as her boss. The ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel glittered beneath 3 enormous crystal chandeliers, each one throwing warm gold light across a crowd of executives, investors, politicians, and celebrities. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the room with trays of champagne. A string quartet played near the marble staircase. Cameras flashed every few seconds as guests posed in front of a wall displaying the silver logo of Sterling Global Industries. At the center of it all stood Victoria Sterling. At 42, Victoria had become one of the most recognizable CEOs in corporate America. Business magazines called her the Ice Queen of industry. Analysts admired her discipline. Shareholders admired her results. Employees, however, had more complicated opinions. Victoria was brilliant. She was also known for remembering titles before names, net worth before character, and influence before humanity. That evening, she wore a deep emerald gown and a diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Her blonde hair was swept neatly behind her shoulders. Every detail about her appearance seemed designed to communicate the same message: control. Tonight was supposed to be her triumph. Sterling Global had just completed its strongest financial year in more than a decade. The company had expanded into 3 new international markets, increased operating profit by 23%, and announced a highly publicized artificial intelligence initiative that investors believed could transform the business. Victoria expected praise. She expected congratulations. Most importantly, she expected confirmation that the board intended to extend her contract for another 5 years. What she did not know was that the most important person in the room had already arrived. His name was Marcus Reed. He was 54 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo. His hair was closely cropped, touched with gray at the temples. He wore no flashy watch, no visible designer logos, and no expression suggesting that he needed anyone's approval. He entered the ballroom alone. That was the first reason no one paid much attention to him. At events like this, powerful people usually announce themselves without speaking. They arrived with assistants, security, publicists, famous spouses. Marcus arrived with none of those things. The second reason he was overlooked was more uncomfortable. Many people in the room simply did not recognize him. Marcus had spent most of the previous decade away from public attention. While other billionaires appeared on magazine covers, podcasts, conferences, and television panels, he preferred private meetings, long-term investments, and quiet philanthropy. He had built Reed Capital from a small investment firm into one of the most influential private holding companies in the country. 6 months earlier, Reed Capital had quietly acquired controlling voting rights in Sterling Global through a combination of institutional purchases, family share negotiations, and a restructuring agreement that had not yet been fully explained to the public. Legally, Victoria Sterling remained CEO. Operationally, she still ran the company. But ultimate control no longer rested with the Sterling family. It rested with Marcus Reed. Very few people inside the company had met him personally. Victoria was not one of them. Marcus knew exactly who she was. She had no idea who he was. That imbalance would soon change everything. Marcus stepped farther into the room and paused near a large floral arrangement. He watched. He had always believed that formal meetings revealed what people wanted others to see. Social events revealed who they actually were. A quarterly presentation could be rehearsed. A smile toward a waiter usually could not. A leadership memo could be written by a communications team. The way someone treated a stranger required no speechwriter. Marcus had learned that lesson from his father. Samuel Reed had spent 32 years working maintenance at a manufacturing plant outside Detroit. He knew every machine in the building, every supervisor, every executive entrance, and every employee whose children were sick or whose car had broken down. Samuel never became wealthy, but he taught his son something Marcus considered more valuable than money. Watch how people treat the person they think they don't need, Samuel used to say. That's where you find their character. Marcus carried those words into every boardroom he entered. That evening, he intended to observe Victoria before formally meeting her. He did not have to wait long. Victoria stood near the center of the ballroom speaking with Senator Richard Hale and billionaire investor Thomas Beckett when Marcus approached. He waited politely for a break in the conversation. Victoria glanced toward him. Marcus smiled and extended his hand. Good evening, he said. Marcus Reed. Victoria's eyes moved briefly from his face to his hand, then back toward Senator Hale. She did not take it. Instead, she gave Marcus the kind of smile people used when they wanted to appear polite without actually engaging. Excuse me, she said. We're in the middle of something. Marcus lowered his hand. Of course. Thomas Beckett noticed the exchange. His eyes narrowed slightly. Unlike Victoria, he had heard the name Marcus Reed before. He had never met him, however, and apparently did not connect the man standing in front of him with the legendary investor. Victoria resumed her conversation. Marcus moved away. There was no anger on his face, only observation. A few minutes later, he stopped near the bar. A young server named Jamal accidentally dropped a cocktail napkin beside him. Marcus bent down and picked it up. Thank you, sir, Jamal said. You've been running all night, Marcus replied. You doing okay? Jamal looked surprised. Guests rarely asked him that. Yeah, long shift, but I'm good. Marcus smiled. Make sure you get some water. Jamal laughed quietly. I will. Across the room, Victoria saw Marcus speaking with the server. Her expression changed. She turned toward her executive assistant, Claire. Who is that man? Claire followed her gaze. I don't know. Vendor. Possibly. Victoria frowned. Make sure security knows he's wandering around the executive area. Claire hesitated. He has a Gala credential. So do hundreds of people. Victoria turned away. Marcus heard none of this. But Claire's discomfort lingered. She had worked for Victoria for 4 years and had learned when not to challenge her directly. That evening, however, something about the situation bothered her. Marcus did not behave like someone who had slipped into the wrong event. He appeared completely comfortable, almost too comfortable. 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself near the silent auction display. A handwritten jazz manuscript donated by a famous composer had attracted Marcus's attention. Victoria approached with 2 major donors. Marcus turned. Once again, he smiled. And once again, he extended his hand. Ms. Sterling, he said. I don't think we were properly introduced earlier. Victoria looked at him, then at his hand. She did not take it. I remember you. Marcus let the hand remain there for another second. Victoria looked toward the donors. We're actually discussing the foundation's expansion campaign. Marcus lowered his hand again. One of my favorite subjects. Victoria's smile sharpened. Are you involved in philanthropy? A little. One of the donors chuckled. Victoria seemed to take the answer literally. Well, every contribution helps. Marcus nodded. I agree. She turned her attention back to the donors. The dismissal could not have been clearer. Marcus stepped away. Behind him, Thomas Beckett had watched the entire interaction. Something began bothering him. He pulled out his phone. He typed 2 words into a search engine. Marcus Reed. The first photograph that appeared showed the same man standing 20 feet away. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Oh God. His wife looked over. What? Thomas stared at the screen. That's Marcus Reed. She shrugged. Who? Thomas leaned closer. Reed Capital. Her expression froze. The Reed Capital? He nodded. The firm that just took control of Sterling? They both looked toward Victoria. She was laughing with a donor. Thomas whispered, she has no idea. By then, Marcus had moved toward a quieter section of the room. He stopped near a window overlooking the city. New York stretched below him, alive with traffic and light. For a moment, he remembered another ballroom. 31 years. Earlier, he had been 23 and working as a junior analyst for a financial firm. His employer had hosted a fundraising dinner at an expensive hotel. Marcus had arrived early, wearing the best suit he could afford. A hotel manager had mistaken him for kitchen staff. When Marcus explained that he was a guest, the manager laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. That somehow made it worse. The man simply could not imagine that someone who looked like Marcus belonged in the ballroom. Years later, after Marcus had earned his first $1 million, he promised himself that wealth would never make him forget that feeling. Being underestimated could make a person bitter, or it could make them observant. Marcus chose the second. Mr. Reed. He turned. Claire, Victoria's assistant, stood behind him. There was uncertainty in her expression. Yes. I apologize for bothering you. You're not. She lowered her voice. I looked at the guest registry. Marcus said nothing. Claire continued carefully. I realized who you are. Marcus smiled faintly. And who am I? Her face reddened. Chairman of Reed Capital. One of my less interesting descriptions. Claire almost smiled. Ms. Sterling hasn't been briefed. I know. Would you like me to tell her? Marcus looked across the ballroom. Victoria was now greeting the chairman of a European bank with extraordinary enthusiasm. She took his hand with both of hers. Not yet. Claire looked surprised. Marcus continued. I'd like to see the evening as it naturally unfolds. Claire understood immediately. You're evaluating her. I'm meeting people. That sounds like a diplomatic version of evaluating her. Marcus smiled. You're perceptive. Claire hesitated before asking. Should I be worried? About yourself? She nodded. No, about her. Marcus looked toward Victoria. That depends on her. Before Claire could respond, a photographer approached. Sir, would you mind moving? We're taking executive photographs here. Marcus stepped aside. No problem. The photographer thanked him. Victoria saw the exchange. A moment later, she walked over. Her tone was quiet but firm. I don't know which sponsor invited you, Mr. Reed, but certain sections of the ballroom are reserved for senior leadership. Marcus studied her face. There was no uncertainty now. No curiosity. Only authority. I understand. Then I'd appreciate it if you respected that. I thought I was. Victoria glanced toward his credential. You have a general donor badge. Marcus looked down at it. The event registration staff had indeed given him a standard silver badge rather than the black executive one. He found the mistake amusing. Apparently, Victoria did not. There are seating assignments for a reason, she said. Marcus met her eyes. Do you believe someone's badge tells you where they belong? Victoria stiffened. I believe organizational standards matter. So do I. Good. For the third time that evening, Marcus extended his hand. Then perhaps we can start over. Victoria stared at the gesture. Her expression contained something colder than impatience now. It carried assumption. Mr. Reed, I really don't have time for this. She walked away. Marcus slowly lowered his hand. 3 attempts. 3 refusals. None of them had been openly hostile. That was precisely why they mattered. Prejudice did not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it wore diamonds, spoke politely, and never once considered itself prejudice. Marcus looked toward the stage. The formal program was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. He had learned enough. Or so he thought. Then he saw something else. Near the service corridor, Jamal, the waiter Marcus had spoken with earlier, was holding a broken champagne glass. A guest had apparently bumped into him. Victoria stood nearby. What happened? I'm sorry, ma'am, Jamal said. Someone backed into the tray. Victoria looked at the wet floor. You need to be more careful. Yes, ma'am. The chairman of Hartwell Bank almost stepped in that. I understand. Jamal crouched to pick up the broken pieces. Marcus moved forward. Don't use your hands, he said. You'll cut yourself. Victoria turned. Her face tightened when she saw him. Marcus picked up a nearby cloth and helped Jamal collect the glass safely. Sir, Jamal whispered, you don't have to do that. I know. Victoria looked embarrassed by the scene. Staff can handle this. Marcus straightened. He is handling it. You are a guest. So is everyone else. Victoria lowered her voice. I don't understand what point you're trying to make. Marcus looked at her calmly. That's the problem. For the first time that evening, Victoria seemed unsettled. Before she could answer, applause filled the room. The master of ceremonies had stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin shortly. Victoria turned away. Marcus helped Jamal place the remaining glass on the tray. Thank you, Jamal said. Marcus nodded. Take care of yourself. Guests moved toward their assigned tables. Victoria sat at the central table beside board members, major investors, and Senator Hale. The seat directly beside her remained empty. She looked toward Claire. Who's sitting here? Claire opened her program. Her face changed. What? Claire looked up. I think there was an update. From whom? Board protocol. Victoria frowned. Before Claire could explain, the lights dimmed. The chairman of the Sterling Foundation walked onto the stage. Good evening, everyone. Applause. He thanked donors, praised employees, and celebrated Sterling Global's performance. Victoria relaxed. This was her moment. A giant screen behind the stage displayed photographs from the company's international expansion. Then the foundation chairman smiled. Tonight is also special because we have the privilege of welcoming a leader whose vision has reshaped investment, infrastructure, healthcare, and technology across 4 continents. Victoria glanced toward Thomas Beckett. He was no longer looking at the stage. He was looking at her. Strangely, almost nervously. The speaker continued. Many of you know that Sterling Global entered a new chapter this year, following a major ownership restructuring. Victoria stopped smiling. Our new controlling shareholder has chosen to remain largely outside the public spotlight while the transition was completed. But tonight, he has agreed to join us. Claire looked down. Victoria whispered, "Why wasn't I told?" Claire did not answer. The speaker continued. He began his career with less than $6,000 in savings. Today, the investment group he founded manages interests worth more than $40 billion. A murmur moved through the room. Victoria's face became pale. She suddenly understood. Not fully, but enough. "No," she whispered. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and chairman of Reed Capital." Victoria turned toward the rear of the ballroom. Marcus was standing beside the table. "Mr. Marcus Reed." The room erupted in applause. Victoria stopped breathing. For several seconds, she could only stare at him. The same man whose hand she had ignored 3 times. The same man she had suggested did not belong near senior leadership. The same man she had nearly asked security to monitor. The same man whose identity she had never considered important enough to investigate. Marcus buttoned his jacket. Then he walked toward the stage. Executives stood. Investors applauded. Photographers rushed forward. Thomas Beckett clapped slowly, never taking his eyes off Victoria. Marcus stepped onto the stage and shook the foundation chairman's hand. The irony was impossible to miss. This handshake was displayed on 2 giant screens. Victoria watched every second of it. Marcus approached the microphone. "Thank you." The room quieted. "I'm not particularly comfortable with long introductions. They make people sound more important than they are." A few guests laughed. Marcus continued, "But I'm grateful to be here." He paused. "Especially because tonight has already taught me a great deal about Sterling Global." Victoria's stomach tightened. Marcus did not look directly at her. "Not yet. When Reed Capital began considering an investment in this company, we studied numbers. Revenue, market share, patents, debt, growth potential." He paused. "But numbers are only one part of an organization." The room became completely silent. Culture is harder to measure. Now Marcus looked toward Victoria. A company's true culture is revealed by how people behave when they believe no one important is watching. Victoria's face burned. Marcus continued calmly. "My father worked maintenance most of his life. He never had an executive title. Never attended a shareholder meeting. Never appeared in a financial newspaper." Marcus glanced toward the service staff standing along the wall. "But he understood leadership better than many CEOs I've met." He smiled faintly. "He told me, watch how people treat the person they think they don't need." Several guests looked toward Victoria. She could feel it. Marcus continued, "I've carried that advice for 30 years. He did not describe what had happened. He did not need to. Too many people had witnessed it. Tonight, I came without assistance or security surrounding me. I wore the same guest badge given to many donors. I introduced myself using only my name." His eyes moved across the ballroom. "And I learned something fascinating." Victoria gripped the edge of the table. "Some people were kind before they knew my position." Marcus looked toward Jamal. "Some were respectful before they knew my net worth." Then his gaze returned to Victoria. "And some people discovered my value only after hearing my title." No one moved. Victoria felt every eye in the room. Marcus stepped slightly away from the microphone. "I don't mention this to embarrass anyone. That somehow made the moment more painful. I mention it because Sterling Global is about to enter a period of enormous change." The screen behind him changed. A new message appeared. Leadership, dignity, accountability. Marcus continued, "We will not build the next chapter of this company on technology alone, or profit alone, or reputation alone." His voice remained calm. "We will build it on standards." Applause started near the back, then spread. Marcus waited. When someone reaches out a hand, you don't need to know their salary before deciding whether they deserve respect. This time, the applause was immediate. Victoria looked down. For the first time in years, she wanted to disappear. After the speech, Marcus returned to the central table. The empty chair beside Victoria had been his. He sat down. For nearly a minute, neither spoke. Finally, Victoria turned toward him. "Mr. Reed." "Victoria, I owe you an apology." Marcus looked at her. Yes. She had expected him to make it easier. He did not. Victoria swallowed. "My behavior earlier was unacceptable." Marcus waited. "I misunderstood who you were." There it was. The sentence that revealed the real problem. Marcus leaned slightly toward her. Would your behavior have been acceptable if you had understood me correctly? Victoria opened her mouth, then stopped. Marcus continued quietly. If I had been a vendor, would ignoring my hand have been acceptable? No. If I had been a waiter? No. If I had been someone looking for a job? Victoria looked down. No. Then your mistake wasn't misunderstanding who I was. He paused. Your mistake was believing you needed to know who I was before deciding how much respect I deserved. Victoria felt the words land harder than anything said from the stage. Because he was right. She wanted to defend herself. To say she was distracted, busy, under pressure, managing donors, protecting protocol. But excuses suddenly sounded childish. I don't consider myself prejudiced, she said. Marcus studied her. Most people don't. Victoria stiffened. Are you saying I ignored you because I'm black? Marcus answered carefully. I'm saying you decided something about me before you knew anything about me. Her eyes dropped. And I suspect you should ask yourself what information you used to make that decision. For the first time, Victoria had no response. The gala continued. Awards were presented. Donations were announced. Music returned. But Victoria barely heard any of it. She replayed the evening again and again. Marcus approaching. His hand extended. Her turning away. Again, and again, and again. At midnight, most guests began leaving. Victoria found Marcus alone near the staircase. May I speak with you? Marcus nodded. She struggled to begin. I've spent my entire career believing that competence excuses everything. Marcus listened. I thought if I produced results, people would forgive impatience. She looked toward the ballroom. I've probably been doing versions of what happened tonight for years. Marcus said nothing. That silence forced her to continue. I notice powerful people. She almost laughed at the ugliness of the confession. I suppose I've trained myself to scan rooms for importance. Marcus nodded. Most ambitious people do. That doesn't make it right. No, Victoria looked at him. Are you going to fire me? Marcus's expression did not change. The board meets tomorrow morning. Her face tightened. That wasn't my question. I know. Do you believe I should remain CEO? Marcus looked out through the glass doors toward the dark city. I believe leadership is not measured by whether someone makes mistakes. He turned back toward her. It is measured by what they do after seeing themselves clearly. Victoria waited. Marcus continued. If your concern tonight is that you insulted your boss, then you haven't learned anything. She nodded slowly. If your concern is that you treated a human being differently because you believed he couldn't affect your career, then we have something to work with. Victoria felt tears forming but refused to let them fall. What would you do? If I were you? Yes. Marcus looked toward the service corridor. I'd start with the people who can't fire you. The next morning, Sterling Global's board assembled at 8 o'clock. Victoria arrived early. Marcus entered at exactly 8. The meeting lasted 3 hours. There were arguments, questions, concerns. Several directors expected Marcus to demand Victoria's resignation. He did not. Instead, he proposed a 12-month leadership review. Executive compensation would now include employee culture metrics. Anonymous workplace discrimination reports would go directly to an independent ethics committee rather than through management. All senior executives, including Victoria, would participate in a leadership program focused on bias, dignity, and organizational power. Victoria accepted every condition. But the most important change occurred outside the boardroom. That afternoon, she walked into the employee cafeteria. Conversations softened immediately. The CEO almost never ate there. Victoria carried her own tray. She sat with 3 employees from logistics. At first, they barely spoke. Then she asked what frustrated them about the company. They looked terrified. Victoria almost smiled. I promise this isn't a trap. One man finally answered. Management doesn't listen until a problem becomes expensive. Victoria wrote it down. The next week, she visited a warehouse, then a customer service center, then one of the manufacturing facilities. She began learning names. Not just executives, receptionists, security guards, drivers, interns, cleaning staff. 3 weeks after the gala, Victoria returned to the Meridian Grand Hotel. She had requested a meeting with one person, Jamal. The young waiter entered the lobby looking confused. Victoria stood when he approached. Mr. Harris? Yes. She extended her hand. He hesitated, then took it. Victoria smiled. I owe you an apology. Jamal blinked. For what? For treating your mistake like it mattered more than your dignity. His expression softened. You don't have to apologize. Yes, Victoria said. I do. They talked for 15 minutes. She learned Jamal was studying business administration at night. 6 months later, Sterling Global hired him into its management training program. Not because Victoria felt guilty. Marcus specifically warned her against that. He doesn't need charity, Marcus had said. Give him an opportunity only if he's earned it. Jamal earned it, and eventually excelled. 1 year after the gala, Sterling Global held the event again. Same ballroom, same chandeliers, same marble staircase. But Victoria felt different entering the room. She spent the first 30 minutes greeting employees from departments that previously would never have reached the central table. Marcus arrived quietly, again without an entourage. This time Victoria saw him immediately. She walked across the ballroom. Marcus smiled. Victoria stopped in front of him. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus extended his hand. Victoria looked at it. The memory between them was impossible to miss. She took it firmly. Good evening, Marcus. Good evening, Victoria. He smiled. You remembered. I don't think I'll ever forget. Marcus glanced around the ballroom. Company had a good year. Victoria nodded. Best employer retention rate in 11 years. I saw. Complaints to the ethics office are up. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sound proud of that. I am. Why? Because people trust the system enough to report problems now. Marcus smiled. That's the correct answer. Victoria laughed. Across the room, Jamal stood wearing a dark suit, not carrying a tray. He had recently been promoted to assistant operations manager. When he noticed Victoria and Marcus, he walked toward them. Ms. Sterling. Jamal. Marcus shook his hand. How's the new position? Busy. That usually means you're learning. Jamal grinned. I hope so. Victoria looked around the room. A year earlier, she would have seen titles, donors, influence, hierarchy. Now she saw people. Not perfectly. Habits built over decades did not disappear in one humiliating evening. She still caught herself making assumptions, still became impatient, still occasionally confused efficiency with leadership. But now she noticed. And when she noticed, she corrected herself. Marcus had once told her that awareness was not the destination. It was the beginning. Later that evening, Victoria stood at the podium. The room quieted. She had not planned to mention what happened the year before. But when she saw Marcus sitting near the stage, she changed her mind. 1 year ago, she began, I learned the most painful leadership lesson of my career. Marcus looked up. Victoria continued. I met a man in this ballroom. A few longtime guests smiled because they already knew the story. He introduced himself politely. She paused, and I ignored his hand. The ballroom became silent. I did it 3 times. A few people shifted in their seats. I told myself I was busy. I told myself I was protecting protocol. I told myself dozens of things that allowed me to avoid the truth. Victoria looked toward Marcus. The truth was that I had decided he wasn't important. She turned back toward the audience. Then someone introduced him as the man who controlled our company. A little laughter moved through the room. Victoria smiled. Suddenly, I discovered I had plenty of time to speak with him. The laughter stopped. That is not a story I'm proud of. She took a breath. But shame becomes useful when you allow it to teach you. She looked toward employees seated throughout the ballroom. I spent years believing respect was something people earned through achievement. Her voice softened. I was wrong. A waiter passed near the back of the room. Victoria noticed him. Trust may be earned. She paused. Authority may be earned. Another pause. Admiration may be earned. Then she said the words Marcus had spent the previous year teaching everyone in the company. But dignity is not earned. The ballroom was completely still. It belongs to people before we know their title. Applause began. Victoria raised a hand, asking them to wait. I used to walk into rooms and ask myself, consciously or unconsciously, who here matters? She shook her head. Now I understand the answer. She looked across the entire ballroom. Everyone. The applause rose. Marcus did not stand immediately. He remained seated for a moment, watching Victoria. Then he remembered his father. Watch how people treat the person they think they don't need. Marcus smiled and stood. The entire room followed. Victoria looked at him from the stage. There were tears in her eyes now. This time she allowed them. Months later, a journalist interviewing Marcus asked him about the famous Gala story. Did you know Victoria would ignore you? The journalist asked. No, were you testing her? Not at first. When did it become a test? Marcus considered the question. When she ignored my hand the second time. And the third? Marcus smiled. By then, I already had my answer. The journalist leaned forward. Why didn't you fire her? Marcus sat back. Because punishment and accountability are not the same thing. What do you mean? Firing someone can remove a problem. He paused. Transformation can remove the cause. The journalist looked thoughtful. So you believe people can change? Marcus smiled. I believe people reveal who they are through choices. He glanced toward the window. And they can choose again. The article was published weeks later. It received millions of views. But the line most frequently shared online did not come from Marcus. It came from Victoria's speech. Dignity is not something people earn after you discover who they are. It is something you give. Then before you know, years later, employees at Sterling Global still told the story to new managers. Not because a CEO had once embarrassed herself. Not because a billionaire had secretly attended a gala. Not because corporate power had dramatically changed hands. They told the story because it reminded them of something easy to forget in environments built around status. A job title can tell you someone's authority. A bank account can tell you someone's wealth. A resume can tell you someone's accomplishments. None of those things tell you how much human respect a person deserves. That question had already been answered long before anyone entered the ballroom. The answer was always the same. All of it. Every time. But the story did not truly end with the applause. Applause was easy. Change was harder. 3 days after the second gala, Victoria arrived at Sterling Global headquarters shortly before 7 in the morning. The lobby was almost empty except for 2 security guards, a receptionist preparing her desk, and a janitor polishing the marble floor near the elevators. For years, Victoria had walked through that lobby without thinking about the people who kept it running. That morning, she stopped. Good morning, Mr. Alvarez. The janitor looked up so quickly that he almost dropped the handle of his floor polisher. Good morning, Miss Sterling. Victoria smiled. How is your daughter doing? Mr. Alvarez stared at her. 2 months earlier, during one of Victoria's employee visits, he had mentioned that his daughter was applying to college. She got accepted, he said proudly. Victoria's smile became genuine. That's wonderful. Thank you. Where? Boston University. Victoria nodded. You must be proud. I am. She continued toward the elevator. Then Mr. Alvarez called after her. Miss Sterling? Victoria turned. Thank you for remembering. The elevator doors opened behind her. For some reason, those 4 words stayed with her all morning. Thank you for remembering. It seemed like such a small thing. A name, a daughter, a conversation. But Victoria was beginning to understand that people often measured respect through small moments long before companies measured it through surveys. At 9 o'clock, her executive team gathered in the main conference room. On the agenda was a proposal to close one of Sterling Global's oldest manufacturing facilities in Ohio. The plant employed nearly 800 people. Financially, the decision seemed obvious. The facility was inefficient. Its machinery was aging. Its labor costs were higher than those at Sterling's newer plants. The chief financial officer displayed a slide showing that closing the plant could save the company nearly $47 million over 3 years. A year earlier, Victoria would have approved the decision in 20 minutes. Now she asked a question. What happens to the employees? The CFO blinked. We'll provide standard severance. How many have worked there more than 10 years? A vice president checked his notes. About 400. And more than 20 years. Roughly 160. Victoria leaned back. What happens to the town? No one answered. The plant supported restaurants, suppliers, trucking companies, local stores, and hundreds of families. The CFO finally said, That's difficult to quantify. Victoria looked toward Marcus, who had joined the meeting by video. He said nothing. He was watching. Victoria noticed. For a moment, she remembered the ballroom, the hand, the assumptions. Then she looked back at her team. I want another option. The CFO frowned. Victoria, the numbers are clear. The numbers are incomplete. We cannot operate an uncompetitive facility indefinitely. I'm not asking us to. She stood and walked toward the screen. Show me what modernization would cost. The CFO hesitated. Potentially 30 million. How much to retrain the workforce? Another 6 to 8. And if modernization improves production enough to keep the facility open? That depends. Then find out. A senior vice president shook his head. We've never analyzed decisions this way. Victoria looked at him. That may be part of the problem. The room fell silent. Marcus finally spoke. Run both scenarios. The CFO nodded. Victoria looked toward the monitor. Marcus gave her no smile. No approval. Just a small nod. For some reason, that meant more. 6 weeks later, the company approved modernization instead of closure. Not because it was sentimental. The numbers ultimately showed that upgrading the plant could produce nearly the same long-term savings while preserving the workforce and increasing regional capacity. For years, no one had seriously studied that possibility. Closing the plant had simply been easier. Marcus later told Victoria, "Compassion doesn't mean ignoring economics." She nodded. "It means making sure economics isn't the only thing you examine." Exactly. The Ohio facility became one of the company's most productive plants within 2 years. But Victoria's transformation was not universally admired. Some executives thought she had become weak. One of them was Daniel Crawford, Sterling Global's executive vice president of international operations. Daniel was 60, sharp, ambitious, and deeply loyal to the old corporate culture. He had known Victoria's father. He had known her grandfather. And he believed companies existed to produce results, not moral lessons. During a private executive dinner, Daniel finally confronted her. "You're changing too much." Victoria placed her glass down. "In what way?" "This obsession with culture. Culture affects performance." That sounds like something a consultant says before sending a $5 million invoice. Victoria almost laughed. Daniel leaned closer. "You survived one embarrassing evening. Fine. You learned something. Fine. But now you're trying to redesign the company around it." Victoria studied him. "What bothers you about that?" "Because people are becoming too comfortable." "Comfortable doing what?" "Questioning management." Victoria's expression changed. Daniel continued. "Complaints are up. Employees challenge decisions. Managers are afraid to discipline people because someone might accuse them of bias." Victoria listened. A year ago, she might have agreed. Now she heard something different. Fear of losing unquestioned power. "Daniel," she said slowly, "do you think respect for employees makes leadership weaker?" "I think hierarchy exists for a reason." "So do I." He looked relieved. Then she continued. "But hierarchy should define responsibility, not human value." Daniel shook his head. "This is Marcus talking." "No." Victoria looked him directly in the eyes. "This is me." Daniel leaned back. For the first time, he seemed to realize that the old Victoria was not coming back. Several months later, an internal investigation discovered that Daniel had repeatedly ignored complaints from employees in Sterling's European division. Some involved harassment. Others involved discrimination in promotion decisions. The evidence showed that Daniel had dismissed multiple reports because he considered the employees involved too junior to matter. When Victoria read that phrase, she stopped. Too junior to matter. She remembered Marcus standing in the ballroom. She remembered deciding that he was not important enough for a handshake. The same disease. A different symptom. She called Marcus. "I know what I need to do." "Then why are you calling me?" "Because a year ago, I might have protected him." Marcus remained silent. Victoria continued. "He's been with the company 27 years. Does that change what happened?" "No." "Then you already know your answer." Daniel Crawford was terminated the following morning. There was no public spectacle. No humiliating announcement. No revenge. Victoria simply informed him that leadership without accountability was no longer acceptable at Sterling Global. Daniel stared at her across the conference table. "You've changed." "Yes." "Because one man embarrassed you at a party?" Victoria shook her head. "No." She paused. "Because one man showed me something about myself that I didn't want to see." Daniel stood. "You'll regret running a company like this." Victoria met his gaze. "Maybe." Then she added, "But I regret how I ran it before." After Daniel left, Victoria sat alone for several minutes. She did not feel victorious. Accountability rarely felt as satisfying in real life as people imagined. Sometimes it meant removing someone you had known for years. Sometimes it meant accepting that loyalty and goodness were not the same thing. Sometimes it meant admitting that a culture you inherited had survived partly because you had helped protect it. That afternoon, Marcus entered her office. "You okay?" Victoria looked toward him. "I fired someone who attended my wedding." Marcus sat down. "You made the decision because of evidence?" "Yes." "Not revenge?" "No." "Not politics?" "No." "Then don't confuse sadness with wrongness." Victoria absorbed that. You always have something ready, don't you? Marcus smiled. No. Sometimes I just sound confident. She laughed. Their relationship had changed significantly since the gala. Marcus remained technically above her in the corporate structure, but over time, he became something closer to a mentor. He never allowed Victoria to depend on his approval. When she asked whether a decision was correct, he often responded with another question. What principle are you protecting? At first, Victoria found it irritating. Eventually, she understood. Marcus did not want to become another powerful person whose approval she chased. He wanted her to develop judgment that remained stable whether he was in the room or not. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after their first meeting, Marcus invited Victoria to Detroit. He did not explain why. A driver took them to a small brick house on the west side of the city. The neighborhood was quiet. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Marcus stepped out. Victoria followed. Where are we? My father's house. She looked at him. You grew up here? Mostly. The house was modest. A narrow porch, small lawn, faded wooden fence. Marcus unlocked the door. Inside were family photographs, old furniture, and shelves filled with books. Victoria stopped beside a photograph of a younger Marcus standing next to an older black man wearing blue work clothes. Your father? Marcus nodded. Samuel Reed. Victoria studied the photograph. He looked serious. He was. Marcus smiled. Until somebody brought food. They walked into the kitchen. Marcus poured 2 glasses of water. My father never saw Reed Capital become what it is now. Victoria sat at the small table. When did he die? 1998. I'm sorry. Marcus nodded. For years, I wished he could have seen the offices. The deals. The company. He looked around the kitchen. Eventually, I realized he had already seen the part that mattered. Victoria waited. He saw who I was before any of it. Marcus sat opposite her. He also knew what happens when people feel invisible. Victoria knew where the conversation was going. The lesson about watching how people treat someone they don't need. Marcus nodded. My father once worked 6 months under a plant manager who never learned his name. Victoria looked down. The manager called him maintenance. Marcus's voice remained calm. My father fixed machines that generated millions of dollars for that company. But to the man running the facility, he was just a function. Victoria felt an uncomfortable familiarity in the story. Marcus continued. One Christmas, that manager's car wouldn't start after a snowstorm. My father spent 40 minutes outside helping him get it running. What happened? The manager thanked him. Marcus smiled sadly, then asked, What's your name again? Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Marcus looked toward the old photograph. That stayed with my father for years. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus leaned back. Because you're no longer changing because you got embarrassed. Victoria looked at him. You're changing because you've started noticing people. She did not respond. And that's different. Outside, a dog barked somewhere along the street. Victoria looked again at Samuel's photograph. I wish I could meet him. Marcus smiled. He would have liked giving you a hard time. I deserved it. He wouldn't have cared about that. Marcus stood. He believed everybody could be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. Victoria thought about those words during the flight home. Years passed. Sterling Global changed. The company remained profitable, sometimes enormously profitable. It also became known for something far less common among large corporations. Employees stayed. Internal promotions increased. Worker satisfaction rose. Legal complaints declined after the initial surge in reporting. Managers began receiving leadership evaluations not only from supervisors, but from employees beneath them. The change was controversial. Several senior executives left. Others adapted. A few became stronger leaders than anyone expected. Jamal Harris was one of them. 7 years after carrying champagne trays at the Meridian Grand Hotel, he became vice president of regional operations. His appointment made national business news. During the press conference, a journalist asked whether his unusual rise was connected to his encounter with Victoria and Marcus at the gala. Jamal smiled. That night got me noticed. He paused. But being noticed is not the same as earning something. He explained that he had completed Sterling's management program, earned an MBA, led 3 successful logistics projects, and helped rescue an underperforming distribution division. Mr. Reed gave me advice once, Jamal said. What advice? He said, never let someone's kindness become the reason you doubt your own ability. Marcus, watching from the side of the room, smiled. Victoria stood beside him. You said that. I say many brilliant things. She laughed. You're becoming arrogant. I've been rich too long. Years later, when Marcus finally announced his retirement as chairman of Reed Capital, the company organized a private dinner. No giant ballroom. No television cameras. No famous politicians. Marcus specifically requested that the gathering include employees from every level of Sterling Global. Executives sat beside warehouse supervisors. Board members sat beside receptionists. Managers sat beside technicians. Jamal sat beside one of the company's newest interns. Victoria stood to speak. Marcus groaned. You promised no speeches. I lied. Everyone laughed. Victoria looked around the room, then toward Marcus. The first time I met this man, he extended his hand. Marcus smiled. Several employees already knew the story. I ignored it. Laughter moved through the room. Then he tried again. More laughter. I ignored him again. Marcus raised 3 fingers. Victoria nodded. Yes, 3 times. She waited for the room to quiet. For years, people have treated that story as funny because the man I ignored turned out to be my boss. She shook her head. But that's not why the story matters. Marcus's expression grew serious. Victoria continued. If Marcus had been nobody powerful, my behavior would have been exactly as wrong. The room became silent. That took me a long time to understand. She looked around at the employees. We live in a world that constantly asks us to rank people. She began counting on her fingers. By wealth, education, job title, influence, appearance, connections. She lowered her hand. But character asks a different question. Her eyes moved toward Marcus. How do you treat someone when there is nothing they can give you? Marcus looked down for a moment. Victoria continued. That question changed my life. She took a breath. It changed this company. Then she smiled. And, Marcus, whether you admit it or not, you changed me. The room applauded. Marcus stood. He walked toward Victoria. For perhaps the 1000th time since that gala years earlier, he extended his hand. Victoria looked down at it. Everyone laughed. She shook her head. Seriously? Marcus smiled. Just checking. Victoria took his hand, then pulled him into a hug. The room rose to its feet. Years later, when Victoria eventually stepped down as CEO, a journalist asked what she considered the defining moment of her career. They expected her to mention the international expansion, the record profits, the technology breakthrough, the acquisitions. She mentioned none of them. Instead, she described an evening beneath 3 crystal chandeliers. A stranger had approached her. He had smiled. He had said his name, and he had offered his hand. She had looked at that hand and decided, in a fraction of a second, that the person offering it did not deserve her attention. Then the room told her he was powerful. Suddenly, everything changed. But the most important transformation came years later, when Victoria finally understood that nothing should have changed at all. Marcus Reed deserved respect before she knew he owned the company. Jamal Harris deserved respect before she knew he had management potential. Mr. Alvarez deserved respect whether his daughter attended college or not. The receptionist deserved it. The driver deserved it. The intern deserved it. The waiter deserved it. The billionaire deserved it. The person whose name would never appear on a building deserved it. Power did not create human worth. Money did not reveal it. Status did not confirm it. And ignorance of someone's importance could never justify treating them as though they had none. That was the lesson Victoria carried for the rest of her life. Because one evening, she had ignored a black man's outstretched hand 3 times. She thought the humiliating part was discovering that he was her boss. It wasn't. The humiliating part was realizing that she should never have needed to know.